Good morning and welcome to Kunzang Pile Joling, and we're happy to have you here, and we're happy to have you join us for teaching by Jetsunma, Ahkon, Lhamo. Today's teaching is slightly different because it came from a different series. It came from the Dharma in Depth series, and the title of it is How to Avoid Short-Circuiting Your Goal. The original teaching was given back in 1990. It's a little bit longer than some of the other teachings from Sundays, but we hope you enjoy it. So, enjoy.
If we examine our own minds, we can see, and also if we examine on our own lives, we can see that we have really not taken the teachings to heart. Because if we examine the contents of our lives, we can see that all of us, each and every one of us, do not act in accordance with those teachings. We create continually causes that can only bring negative results. Wouldn't you say that that's true? And we do that continually. And perhaps we've changed our lives in many ways. Perhaps we have come to the point where we have eradicated a lot of the really gross negative behavior that was a problem for us. Certainly in the case of the ordained, there are many things that they've taken out of their lives. But if we examine ourselves on a more subtle level, we can see that on that level we haven't really changed very much at all. We still hold on in a very graspy way to certain expectations about what we should have, who we are, and how we should be treated. We continually have anger and hatred. We continually are involved in greed, if not the greed of wanting to possess certain things or to possess other people's belongings, then the more subtle greed or grasping toward approval and towards certain kinds of elements in our relationships. Certain kinds of life situations. Certainly, we continue with ignorance, in that there's a dullness that seems to plague us, isn't there? Even when we've heard the teaching, that dullness persists, and that we engage in activities about which we do not even consider the results. We somehow think that there are a certain percentage of things that we can do in our lives or throughout our day that somehow will magically bring no good result. When if we're thinking we can look at ourselves and we can say, what could I have thought was going to happen there? What must I have been thinking of? You see what I'm saying? But this dullness persists, causing us to not consider the repercussions. And of course, we're really bothered by that. But are we bothered enough? It seems that we don't do everything that we can to rout these things out. Or somehow, when we try, we short-circuit ourselves. Going back to the theme that we have been discussing for some time now, how should we think of this? Well, first of all, we know that when it comes to making the kind of progress that brings us closer to liberation, that we are solely responsible for that progress. We understand and we recognize, due to the teaching, that we have a certain tendency to look outside of ourselves for help or guidance or satisfaction in some way. We almost have a theistic approach, thinking that if we pray hard enough, somehow magically something will turn around. But we don't somehow get that fine line. We don't somehow get that need to really take responsibility to change ourselves. We have this tendency to think up magic formulas, funny little games that we play in our heads. Like, if I do this and this and this and this, maybe I can have this. But we don't realize that the grasping that causes us to want to have that grasping may in itself bring about some real negativity. And that plainly it simply continues our grasping. We usually don't do our best. We usually don't try our hardest. We usually don't really examine the contents of our minds, and being very truthful, vow to root out what we find there that is inconsistent with the goal. We usually don't do these things. Yet we have been taught, most recently, and in some form we have been taught this again and again and again, that ultimately the goal is enlightenment. Ultimately the goal is Buddhahood. And that there's only one way to view that goal, and there's only one way to approach it. And that is through the complete purification of all desire, of all ego clinging, through the complete purification of all erroneous perception, and through the attainment of the pure view of the primordial wisdom state. That's the goal. So what can we be thinking then when we shortchange our practice? What can we be thinking when we allow anger to co-reside in our mind with all the other things that we also feel in there? Thinking that if we just keep it quiet, it's okay that it's there. Why, how, knowing that, is it okay to continue to grasp in the ways that we do? How is that okay? Isn't it strange that we know this thing, we know what the goal is, that we know that there are direct cause and effect relationships that we must practice in order to reach the goal, and yet we try to slide by and short-circuit it and make up our own path? Isn't it strange how we do that? Ultimately, one realizes the Buddha nature to be the only method, the only reality, the only goal And upon realizing that, one has to act accordingly. One cannot devise any other scenario other than what the Buddha has taught in order to bring that most perfect result. Simply because we ourselves have not reached Buddhahood. Therefore, we cannot know the method. Still, however, we trip ourselves up. How is that so? We have such strong habitual tendencies. And these habitual tendencies are so compulsive, so overwhelming, that we find ourselves repeating behavior that has brought only bad result again and again and again. And we find ourselves engaging in behavior just like it, to bring us a different and new and wonderful kind of suffering, again and again and again. This habitual tendency is so strong, it seems to be so deeply embedded in us. And it is because we have been engaging in those same habitual patterns since time out of mind, since a time we cannot conceive of. Since the first assumption of self-nature as being inherently real, since that first view, since the first exaggeration that took place after that assumption, since the first need to define a separation between other and self, and to keep that definition very firm. Since that first activity, we have developed a set of habitual patterns. At this point, these habitual patterns become a very strong karma. Now we are seeing the result of previous causes, maybe some causes that took place a very long time ago, a time that we cannot conceive of. Sometimes the very feelings that we feel, sometimes the very hatred that we experience that plagues us when try as we might to get rid of it, the very anger that we experience in our mind must clearly be understood as the result of previous karma. Isn't that hard to understand? Because we look at our minds and we think, I'm angry, I'm filled with hatred. I'd like to find out what exactly I'm angry about. Well, if we do that, we can always find something we're angry about. I mean, you can sit down with a therapist or with a friend, and you can always find something you're angry about. There's lots of things in the world to be angry about. You can hang on anything. But what you're really seeing at this point in time is the result of previous karma. To have that much hatred or that much anger in the mind is the result, is karma. So now we have two things that we have to deal with. We have not only this habitual tendency, which is very tight and very spaceless, it's very tightly wrapped, but we also have this plague, this thing that keeps plaguing us, this continual experience of this result, probably of things that we can't remember ever doing. Think about that for a minute. Here we've just read all these wonderful teachings as to how, if you do good activity, you will have good result, you will achieve Buddhahood. That's absolutely guaranteed. There's no question about that. On the other hand, if you continue to engage in the poisons, continue to revolve in activity that is negative, clearly then we will end up in the lower realms and continue to suffer as we have suffered in cyclic existence and be of no use to anyone else. Yet we can't seem to really put the brakes on, right? We can't seem to really stop ourselves. We're arrogant, we're haughty, we're self-righteous, we're filled with anger, we're filled with jealousy, we're filled with grasping. All these things. If this habitual tendency is so compulsive, so enduring, so strong as it is, that we can almost feel ourselves sliding into that mode and also feel ourselves unable to stop. And if, as the teaching tells us, this hatred, greed, and ignorance is so all-pervasive in our mind streams that, like looking through tinted glasses, we can't see right. Due to our karma, our perception is so messed up that we can't even tell which end is up. If this is true, how can we possibly hope to be true to ourselves? How can we possibly hope to hold enlightenment as being the ultimate goal? How can we possibly hope to move directly toward the pure view of the primordial wisdom state? How can we possibly understand our own nature to be the true guru? How can we take responsibility where we are plagued with this madness? Well, this is the kind of thought we get hooked up with. We can see the compulsion, or at least some of us can. We can see the habitual tendency. We can look at these things happening to us again and again and again, and happening inside of us again and again and again, and say, clearly this must be karma, because I don't feel like I'm really trying to do this. And because of that, we allow ourselves to fall into a kind of, I really don't have a word for this, but it's a position where you submit to that. You kind of roll over like a dog with your feet in the air and submit to that kind of thing. And it's that posture of submission that makes us something akin to spiritual whores. It's that posture of simply rolling over and letting it roll, letting it slide, that prevents us from experiencing spiritual fidelity. Think about it in this regard. What is this drunkenness that causes us to continue to revolve in cyclic existence? This thing that lets us keep going through the same patterns, and we just don't think about it until we're already finished with it. You know how you get caught up, don't you? You know what I'm talking about. What causes this drunkenness? It's almost as though we were drugged with sensual phenomena. What causes us to continue like that? Well, let's try this. Maybe it's the karma. Maybe it's the result of always rolling over with our legs up in the air. Maybe that drunkenness is a karma that we have accumulated over a great long period of time. Because we always submit and feel victimized to and feel victimized by this neurotic perception that we have. We always allow ourselves to just go with these habitual tendencies. We've been doing this since time out of mind. Has it helped us so far? Has it ever once produced good result? What we've always done is to roll over, put our feet up, and whine, just like a dog. I can't help it, but my suffering is so great. This is happening to me, nobody else. That kind of whining. We've done this for how long? As long as you've known yourself, right? Long as I've known you, long as I've known me. And I guarantee you, if that's the case, this isn't the first time we've done it. So what is the answer? If we have these strong habitual tendencies, if we have this karma ripening constantly, what's the answer? The Buddha already gave you an answer. You don't have to think about it. Aren't you lucky? But you keep trying to find another answer. But the Buddha already taught that the answer is to apply the antidote, to engage in the opposite behavior. The Buddha taught us that if, for instance, we find ourselves involved in poverty, that the probable cause was selfishness or greed. And what would be the antidote? More selfishness and greed? Let's think about me for a while. I'm poor. Would that be the antidote? What would the antidote be? The antidote would be generosity, kindness, upholding the welfare of others. What can it possibly be if not that? One applies the antidote. But do we ever do that? When we're poor, what do? We roll over like a dog, hold up our feet, and start whining immediately. That's what we do. And it's the same thing with other things. It's not just monetary things, it's internal things. Let's say we have so much anger in our minds. Anger plagues us. No matter what we do, we can't figure out where it's coming from. We're always trying to get rid of it. It's always there. Well, probably that internal anger is the result of being hateful and angry toward other people in some previous time. There's a good chance that that's the case. So what would the antidote to that be? Would the antidote to that be expressing the anger? Would it be processing the anger with someone? Is that like the stupidest thing you've ever heard? The Buddha would teach us to apply the antidote. And the antidote would be generosity, kindness, going out of your way, making yourself uncomfortable even, to be kind to others, putting yourself out for others, supporting them by telling them how terrific they are, being really kind. What a revelation. But that's not what we do. We roll over like dogs, hold up our little legs and say,
I got all this hatred inside of me, and you just better leave me alone, because I'm suffering.
that's what we do.
I have a bad mood.
Is that not what we do? Does that make sense to you, if you think about it? Are we being true to ourselves? Are we being true to the path? Are we being true to the goal? Are we being true to our nature? What can we be thinking of when we engage in the kind of activity that we engage in? Now, granted, if you decide you're going to turn over a new leaf and you're going to apply the antidote, and you were like the most hateful person anyone has ever met, which maybe some of you, then you decide perhaps on what you're going to do is apply the antidote, and the antidote would be like kindness and generosity and support and caring for others, telling them how wonderful they are, being with them, going out of your way to help them. It may very well look like this. You're a nasty, rotten person, but you think, I'm going to apply the antidote. So you see a poor, unfortunate person that you can help. And you sort of go over there and you say, for 1 hour, I'm going to help. And you just put on your little sweet face and you just, sweetie, sweetie, sweetie. And you do the best you can. And it may very well be that when the clock struck 60 minutes from the time you started that, you may have to run into your room and go, ah! But at least you have tried. At least you have applied the antidote. Some of us don't even do that much. If you continue to act in that way, what will happen is the pile of nastiness will become approximately the same size as the pile of niceness. And it's kind of like they cancel each other out, you know, if you're thinking like this, in terms of weight. Because what you have is the weight of habitual tendency. It just continues to drag your mind down. Whereas if you engage in the opposite way, eventually there will be enough weight there. Of course, if all you're going to do is be nice to somebody an hour a day and nasty the rest of the day, you won't make much progress. It will be very long time coming. So you have to think of some different techniques. You have to think about praying for the world. You have to think about really taking to heart the suffering of others, like in studying these kinds of teachings that Ani read, and studying them to such a degree that you are filled with longing that you could help them, and then you pray for them. That is a very meritorious thing to do. But you have to do so in such a way that your mind is really being true to it. You can't be in your nasty space being nasty at the same time you're pretending to be nice. You have to take time off from nastiness. Come over here and be nice for a while. You have to really develop your ability to care for others. You may have to look at yourself and be perfectly truthful and see that you don't have much of it yet. And that's okay. If that's where you're starting, that's where you are. What to do, right? I mean, it's kind of like building a muscle. If it starts small, that just means it's going to look so much better when it grows up. Wherever you start, that's where you are, and you have to respect that and you have to start there. But the point that I'm trying to make is that we have to break that cycle of rolling over and just submitting to this phenomena. Of not being true to ourselves, of thinking that we don't have to really do anything or really change, and that somehow it will work out okay. And the only way to really break that cycle is by taking yourself in hand and really breaking it. The karma of that dullness, what would the antidote be to that? To forcefully and intelligently and purposefully determine to break that dullness. And to examine one's mind, to examine the teaching, and to apply the teaching in some intelligent way to the degree that you can immediately. That's the only way that dullness will be broken. Otherwise, you'll find yourself, as always, continuing to fall into the rut that you always fall into. And nothing changes. You do not change because of that. When you look at yourself and you ask yourself why you can hear the teachings, and yet you are not true to the teachings, you do not act as the teachings instruct you to do, what do you come up with? Do you come up with, I can't help it? I seem to just glaze over? I seem to just fall into it? It seems to be beyond my control? I seem to not be able to take myself in hand? I try, but it gets away from me? Or is it just plain old sloth and laziness? Sloth and laziness is an excuse that I don't want to hear anymore. Because you know what people do with that? They just say, well, you're right, you're the teacher, and you're right, I'm lazy. Well, that's great, but that means you don't have to do anything. All you have to do is be a little repentant. That doesn't help you. If you're slothful and if you're lazy, if that dullness gets the best of you and you feel victimized by it, then you have to take action. And if it's a little action, if all you can do is a little bit, then do that much. We need to understand that the changes that we want are the ones that lead us to enlightenment. They do not occur while we continue in cyclic existence as we have continued. Nothing will ever change if we continue as we have. The only way to institute those changes is the way that the Buddha has given us, by applying the direct antidote and doing so diligently. While it's true that some people may be able to make a massive effort and really break the ice, some people may only be able to make a small effort. But that small effort, if done with diligence and faith, will produce result. If it doesn't produce the final result, then it will produce the result of leading you to a time where you can bring about a full effort. But at whatever level you can be true to yourself, be true to yourself. If your suffering arises from habitual tendencies, and whose doesn't? If your suffering arises from the resultant karma, from long causes and causes and causes that we have brought about since times that we can't even remember, if these things are true, and for who are they not true, then we should begin to bring about the antidote now. Some people think it's just enough to be a Buddhist. Well, that's crazy. Being a Buddhist is just more phenomena. What's the big deal about being a Buddhist? If you're the kind of Buddhist that really examines the teachings and follows the teachings and really practices the teachings and really examines your mind and really puts them into use, then that's great. But just being a Buddhist without doing those things, it's just another word. And some people think that it's enough just to wear robes. I mean, I know that some ordained people don't practice very much, and when they do, they don't practice very strongly, and they don't really apply themselves to changing these strong habitual tendencies. And so in that regard, of what use is your activity? I've said it again and again, it's not just enough to dress up. One has to be true to the ultimate goal and to follow the instruction that we are given by the Buddha, who has himself achieved the ultimate goal, so that we can bring that result about. Sometimes we get burned out by being involved in a spiritual life. Sometimes we think that there isn't enough food in it, or we feel that we're not completely nourished, or we feel that we're falling away, or we feel that we're caught up. Or I've heard them all. I've heard all these different feelings. I've heard every one of them, even from those wearing robes. And what does that mean? Well, what it means is that you're not really practicing. That's really what it means. Because if we were really practicing, there is enough nourishment to keep us going forever. If we were really practicing, we would be coming closer and closer to the goal. And that closeness would bring about the result of a relaxed mind and a feeling of peace and contentment. Our minds are still aflame, and we allow them to be so. And so, of course, we are discontent. Our minds are still functioning in the same habitual way they have been functioning in for how long now? So, of course, we're disappointed. And we are still experiencing the karma that we have not yet purified. So, of course, we are deluded and lost in cyclic existence. Somehow, we are sitting here in this Buddhist temple in Poolesville, Maryland, and we are not taking the teaching to heart. We are not truly practicing the method. The method is to apply the antidote. And in order to do that, one must look at the teaching, examine it exactly. One must examine one's own mind and one's own tendencies. And one must live and breathe and act and institute the antidote. And somehow, we can sit and meditate all day long and not do that. How is that possible? Ultimately, the true refuge is your own Buddha nature. But you have not tasted that nature. We have not tasted that nature because we are involved in delusion. So caught up in habitual tendency. Such division within our minds. Such fixation on self-nature as being inherently real that not for one moment have we tasted that nature. So, the thing to do then is to apply the antidote to that very delusion, rather than rolling over and playing dead because you are deluded. Does that make any sense? And yet we do it constantly. Do you see my point? We roll over and play dead. Does anyone have a question about that? To grieving? Well, I would look at what grieving really is, what the cause, what grieving actually is. Grieving is actually something that one feels when one has lost something. So my best guess, although I'm not the Buddha, and I don't know exactly what the Buddha has said about that, is that grieving would be causing grief in others or taking something away from others. And so the antidote to grieving would be to subsidize others in some way, or to, not necessarily financially, but to give in such a way as to make others feel more whole and complete. And to comfort those that are grieving also. A loss of someone that has died, yeah. In that case, if you look at what actually happens there, the death of a person, when we grieve for death and fear our own, both of those things come from our not being prepared for death. And in the case of grieving for someone else, not being prepared to help others through the death experience. And so that grief can be dealt with by learning how to be more useful to others and also learning to prepare yourself for the death experience. So that, you know, if you have the opportunity, you can practice POA for someone else, or you can, you know, really be of benefit in that way. That will help. But most of us have a very poor understanding of what death is. We cling to the self so strongly. If we think of, for instance, a dying relative, we think of that relative as being just that, my relative, that's mine. You know, we don't think of this as the continuation of samsara. We don't really understand what that is. And so we have no way to deal with it. You can't deal with the death of a relative. The relative you have is going to die, every single one. So there's no way to cope with that or deal with that. In order to relate to death effectively, one must understand that all sentient beings, the same, without partiality, are revolving in cyclic existence. And what we have to do is to come to a level of realization sufficient to where we can be a guide to them and be ourselves secure in that regard. So we have to apply wisdom, knowledge. The antidote, what? To fear. You know, you're asking me to give you these cut and dry teachings. What I would rather is for you to learn to think these through. We have been given a whole list of teachings when Bhakatulka was here on what things are brought about by what, cause and effect relationships. Do you remember that? Other than that, my guess is as good as yours. But I would say that if you had a great deal of fear, that and if that fear is just all pervasive, it stays in your mind and you can't get rid of it even if you resolve anything, like for instance, if you have a fear of being attacked, even if you lock all your doors and you're still afraid, you know, that kind of fear that just stays with you against all logic and reason, that kind of fear it's like a karmic obstacle in your mind, and probably it's caused by inspiring fear in others. That in the past, somehow you made others very fearful. Or are kept security away from others in some way. So that you yourself are experiencing that. It's pretty easy to do. I mean, you just sort of look at what the opposite of that must be. And you try to apply the antidote. So of course the antidote would be to preserve life, to protect life, to comfort those that are fearful, to provide stability for other life forms, other sentient beings. You don't have to think about this. The Buddha's already thought it out. See, that's what I'm trying to tell you. This is really good that you've asked this. The Buddha has already thought it out. You don't have to look and see if it's working. If you apply the antidote, it's working. You don't have to think about that. We spend too much time worrying about that. We're constantly doing that. We're checking ourselves out. And then we find ourselves falling into the trap of just doing it so that we'll feel better, which isn't doing it at all, really. I mean, it's not the Mahayana view, certainly. So, I mean, if for instance, you find that you have a lot of hatred, and then what you do is you put some weight in the opposite pile, which is generosity, prayer for others, giving, you know, compassionate activity, then you know you're making a dent in it, because that's what the Buddha has taught. And even if it seems to you that you're not making a dent at it, you have a choice. You can either take your limited perception, or you can take what the Buddha says. I, for one, am going to listen to the Buddha. So you know absolutely that if you apply the antidote with diligence and with devotion to the Buddha's teaching, then you're making a dent in it. What happens to us that trips us up is that we are overwhelmed at the stuff we find in our minds once we start looking. Isn't that the truth? I mean, wasn't it great when you were barefoot and ignorant? You could just like act a certain way and drive a fast car and nobody cared. You know, it was just great. Suddenly you meet up with this teacher that says, look at yourself, children, you're going to be enlightened, come on. And you look at yourself and you're going, ah! It's kind of like a horror movie. It's like watching Friday the 13th part 24. Jason rises again, or whatever it is. And wherever you go, he keeps on rising again. You kill him and he's there again somehow. It's really like that. I had a great encounter with somebody, a couple that had just come out of, a few months ago, came out of 3-year retreat. And they were describing how when they first went into retreat, they actually didn't know anything about Dharma, that they were just like general metaphysics experts. You've met general metaphysics experts, haven't you? They're everywhere. They're all over the New Age. And they were supremely omniscient in their general metaphysics way, and all-powerful and all that stuff. And they sort of met up with the Dharma and thought it was really great, and thought it was cool the way everybody wore robes and rang bells and, you know, all that kind of stuff. And so they, rang bells. And they thought they'd get into it. So they had amazing karma. They met up with His Holiness Khyentse Rinpoche. And he said, go into 3-year retreat right away. And they said, ah! But since they felt that they were pretty close to supremely omniscient, and this is their words, they're very, very sure that they were supremely omniscient anyway, and His Holiness said so, it must mean they're very, very close. To what, we don't know, but very, very close. So anyway, they go into 3-year retreat, right? And they had such a hard time, especially the guy had such a hard time in 3-year retreat. Because you know how it is when you're supremely omniscient and there's no one to impress? How irritating that can be? You know how just irritating that can be. Well, here he was, supremely omniscient, and nobody cared. And the Vajra master that was leading the retreat was just like not impressed. In fact, every time he'd spout off, he'd put him in solitary. And so he had a really hard time. And they went through 3-year retreat, and it was very arduous for them, very, very hard, and they came out of it. And the guy said, well, I used to be so proud of being on my own and able to follow my own path and do my own thing and have such good results, omniscient as I was. He said, and now I've been in 3-year retreat, and he said, it would be great if I could be proud of being in 3-year retreat. You know, it would be great if I could walk around and say, hey, I've been in 3-year retreat, have you? You know, and then you could use that too. He said, but see, it's not working for him, because one thing he learned while he was in 3-year retreat, and he thinks that's what people really do while you're in 3-year retreat, is learned how boundless is your stupidity, how endless is your ignorance, how unbelievably full is your bucket of shit. And that was what he found out in 3-year retreat. He basically spent enough time in solitary where every time he'd think, he'd get it just right. So he'd practice real good. Get it just right. Now he's perfect. Mind is flat line. Everything's fine. He goes out and he sees somebody, and the first person he sees brings up that arrogance and hatred in him. So he goes back, and he does the same thing again. And what do you find out when you practice Dharma? What do you find out in a situation like our situation where you're deeply involved in a mandala of activity? What do you find out? The first thing you find out is what an abomination you are. And it can be real disappointing. But you do. You find out that you're an abomination. You find out that it will never end. You have no idea whether there's any help for you. But you feel like there's nothing else to do. I mean, if there's a big mess of shit on the floor, the only thing to do is keep cleaning it up. And that's what you do for a long time. That's what it feels like. It's supposed to be that way. It's supposed to be that way because Dharma works. If it just sort of painted over the top What would be the point? Anything you do could do that. I mean, you could dress up real pretty and live in a nice house and marry somebody nice, and that would paint it over the top. But that never works, does it? Does it? Never works. So you have to find something that digs deep, and it's going to get the stuff underneath. And in order for it to get the stuff underneath, it's going to keep shoveling it to the top. And that's really, Dharma's like a knife. It really cuts. It's meant to cut through cyclic existence. Do you think it's not going to be sharp? Do you think you're not going to be appalled at what you find inside yourself? Do you think you're not going to be swept away with your own hatred, greed, and ignorance? But what you have that is your safety valve, that you can depend on, is you have the objects of refuge to help you. You have the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha, and most of all, you have your teachers to guide you and help you and be like the captain taking the boat across the ocean of suffering. And you have to look to those objects of refuge at those times. When you're looking at yourself and you're thinking, I'm shoveling away, and I'm not making a dent in this hatred, then you should never think like that. You should look at your objects of refuge and you should think that the Buddha has laid out this path. If I am doing what the Buddha says, it's going to work, and I have complete reliance on the objects of refuge. I completely rely on them for that. You see what I'm saying? Because the other option is to rely on yourself. And what good are you doing? But of course, in one regard, you have to rely on yourself for diligence and effort. On that, you have to rely on yourself. If you really want to have any kind of regard for yourself, if you really care and want to treat yourself with any dignity, and you should care about that, then you should apply that diligence. Otherwise, you're just rolling over.
Thank you so much for joining us today and for just being here. And welcome again. Let's see where I am here. I did want to put this in the chat, so let me do that. This is just a kind of a message about where you can go to find out more information. So not meant to be overwhelming or anything, but this can be a little bit of an overwhelming place because there's so much going on. And I haven't quite worked out how to make that simple. But here we are. And we do have a website, tara.org. And it is available to you all the time. On that website, there are a couple things I want to highlight. And one of them is the calendar, which is will give you information on any of the practices that we're doing, most of which we put up online, and you can join. So essentially you just go, the easiest way to, you can get there about a dozen ways, but one of them is just to scroll down on the front page, and on the left-hand side at the bottom, if you're on a computer, is a screen that basically says, um, teaching, like live stream, and then it has calendar, and click on the calendar page, and it will give you a surprise calendar on that. It's a Google Calendar, and that calendar has the all of the practice schedule. You click on the practice when you see the one that you think you might want to attend. It will give you the download for the actual practice itself, so you can follow along, and it will give you the codes to get in on whatever web service we're using to stream that teaching at the moment. So our general three are YouTube, Facebook, and Zoom often. Zoom often for practices, because it allows us an easy chat feature. So, and a lot of our Sangha is not on other media. So there you are. That's a good start. And also, it gives you information on the teachers and information on what's happening. Today, this afternoon, Khenpo Tenzin Karzai is teaching, and basically he's doing the meditation class that would normally be done on Sunday. He's doing it in his own style, and right now he's focusing on the four immeasurables, which are the qualities that we all want to embody. And I believe he's on number 2. Yeah, because he started last week. And so you can look, and that's being shared on YouTube, our KPC's YouTube channel, and also Facebook. So if you check on YouTube, you'll be able to find, last week's, probably on Facebook too. I haven't looked, so I can't answer that just yet. So check that out, and join us. Khenpo Tenzin Karzai is an absolute delight, and we're working out getting another schedule for some of his deeper teachings, which were in the evenings, but Jetsunma has said that for right now, things are so crazy in the world that we need to be doing the practices in the evenings. Apparently, everybody's more active in evenings, at least in the DA world, and so we can engage all of those deities in a better way. I wouldn't be able to, confirm or deny, but I do know we're doing them at 7 p.m. every evening. Will be a practice. It's usually Rigzen Dupa or Gurkukma Kalaya. So Vajra Kalaya or Rigzen Dupa, which is a Guru Rinpoche practice. And so join us for that 7 p.m. on Zoom. So let's see, where else? We also have meditations on Saturday morning, in addition to the one that Khenpo does on Sundays, that are on YouTube and Facebook, and in person, is the meditation. So in person, don't forget that part. Medicine Buddha is only online, and it's on YouTube and Facebook, and that is at 5:30 p.m. So 5:30 p.m. is our Medicine Buddha practice, and it is it's very short. It's mostly in English, with some mantra, and it's very effective at bringing Medicine Buddha to help with whatever is needed. So, have at it. The soak I've already talked about. Let me see. Yeah. So, and these teachings by Jetsunma on YouTube, Sundays at 10. At the moment, they are not in person. If we can rewire up the machinery, we will do that, but we'll let you know. But It's not going to be today or anytime soon. We don't have the equipment. So anyway, so there we go. And we're happy to have you join us. And we're really happy to have you here today. So at 11:30, which is in just a half an hour from now, Kempo will be in the prayer room live and also on YouTube, Zoom, and YouTube, Facebook, and Zoom, I believe, the whole kit and caboodle. So enjoy it. He's wonderful in meditation. There will be short meditation and short talk about it and Q&A. So pitch in. Thanks. And we're glad to see you. Hope to see you next week. Thank you.